Fran.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon. Hi.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Niclas, can you hear us?
Kasper, it sounds like your heart rate's going in the background.
Yeah, no, my heart rate is much higher. You know, that's actually. I'm not in the sofa. There's a huge construction work going on out there, so maybe I should switch off my mic. I cannot tell them to switch off the construction work, so.
Just a couple more minutes. I think we're just waiting on John and Paul still. I still haven't seen them come up, but we'll get underway in a couple of minutes' time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matthew. How's things, Robbie? Do you have snow up where you are? Can't hear you, Robbie.
Sorry, I think there. No, it's stunning. Beautiful day. Sun splitting the sky for about the third or fourth day.
Oh, lovely.
Sadly, locked down like everyone else. Otherwise, be out and about. The skiing resorts have got the best ever snow, and nobody can go.
Sod's law, isn't it?
Yeah.
Matthew, given that we're up to time and we have a couple of people with tech issues, shall we crack on and let people join us when they can?
Yes, Fran, I've just sent, I will just send a message to the other two about that, and if we can get underway, that'd be fantastic. Thank you very much.
Brilliant, thank you. And firstly, I'd like to thank my colleagues for joining this panel. I think we've got such a wide representation here. We cover nearly every facet of the ferry industry, whether it's the small domestic fleets through to large international operators. And I think one of the things that's really key for me is that it doesn't matter in the size and scale of the operations, but actually we're all facing very similar strategic challenges. I took the opportunity to pull a few stats with Matthew Wright's help from the Chamber, and many of you may already know this, but the UK Chamber ferry members collectively operate around only 2.7% of the world's ferry fleet. We've got around 218 vessels between us all, and the average age of those ships is 18. When we compare this to the global average age of 27, it's absolutely clear that the Chamber members are leading the way in modernising our fleets, and we're adopting the new technologies. However, that said, with more than 40% of members' ferries being under the age of 15, we can't lose sight of the fact that the planning replacement of these vessels is actually just around the corner. And I think the other thing that did surprise me was that the global fleet, of that, more than 60% of the global fleet are over the age of 20. Even for me here at Red Funnel, we have 3 ageing RoPax vessels that we shortly want to replace. We're starting to look at decisions around design, construction, and propulsion, but they can only be taken in alignment with the providers of the infrastructure. And as yet for us, there's no clear leader in the race for the net zero propulsion. I think for us all as company leaders, we've got to maintain focus on the long term and the strategic picture. But in recent years, I think I probably speak for many when I say that our focus has come forward. We used to maintain easily a 20 to 30 year plan. With Brexit, we started to reduce our forecast. We came to 5 years, 2 years, and then closer. So our view went from decades to years and then months. And COVID has actually taken us down at times to days. I think over Christmas, probably many of us found that having working 2 weeks and months out, we were actually literally changing decisions for our businesses on a daily basis. The backdrop of the challenges and opportunities that we're facing, though, haven't gone away because of Brexit and COVID. The journey to sustainable operations, or fully sustainable operations, and net zero is gathering pace. We've got to work collectively with R&D, with financial partners, with industry. We've got to make sure that the solutions we can put into our replacement tonnage are viable and supported and effective. And I think that was very clear from the keynote speech we've just listened to. The relationships with shipyards, suppliers and builders are critical, and we've got to, again, go back to the infrastructure being in place to supply and support the use of alternative fuels. I think this can only be achieved by increasing collaboration with partners that are outside the industry. Other things that we've got to consider are the requirements for the operation, the next generation of our seafarers and their training and the support they require. And obviously now, perhaps more than ever, we need to be sure that we understand our customers' needs to make sure that we're providing the services to them that make our businesses financially sustainable so that we remain competitive against other transport modes. With our customers, their needs are now changing as a result of COVID and Brexit. So making sure that the tonnage we replace our current fleets with meets their needs is utterly critical. What I'd like to do now is invite my colleagues on the panel to comment, perhaps just to do 3 or 4 minutes around the broad fleet renewal plans, what challenges you're facing from an individual and company perspective. And I think if we keep this brief, high level and strategic, and if anyone has any comments, please feel free to, or questions, drop them into the chat box and we'll answer them as we can. So what I'll do, Kasper, if I could start with you, please, from DFDS perspective, if you could give us 3 or 4 minutes on that basis, that would be great.
Thank you so much, Fran. Please interrupt me if I exceed my 3 to 4 minutes. I guess once we get started here, we continue the entire day. But first of all, short introduction to DFDS. If you don't know us, we operate more than 50 vessels throughout Europe and part of the European infrastructure. And we have just finished a decision wave, you can say. When you look into new buildings and renewal of the fleet, it always comes in waves as we see it. And we've just finalized taking delivery of 6 extremely large row vessels from China, 6,700 lane meters. And this summer, we will start to take the delivery of 2 RoPax vessels also from China, and also another RoPax vessels for the channel operation that will take on bareboat charter from our dear friends in Stena for the next 10 years' time. Thank you so much for that, Niclas.
Welcome.
So of course, from the short-term point of view, we have taken decisions long ago, and now we'll start to harvest, meaning that looking at our fleet for the next 5 years' time, we are in an okay position. The tricky part is, of course, that in 10 years' time, we have to renew a majority of our fleet, meaning that from now on, in the next 5 years' time, we need to make up our minds what is it that we need to do when we're going to place the order. In the good old days, it was much, much easier. You just need to have the commercial clarity. There's a product, there's a competitive landscape, and there's an operation, engine room, propulsion power, etc. All that was a pretty straightforward business case. You can calculate a net present value, looking 30 years ahead of time, and you can actually take a decision and bring it to the board, and we are ready to place an order. Now we have much more to take into consideration. You mentioned it before, Fran. In the old days, it was about legislative requirements. There was the date where you had the keel laying. That was more or less the birth date of the vessel. Once you succeed to place that before a specific date, you were home safe for the next 30 years. We have seen recently that now it is actually not enough just to look at the birth date, because there will be requirements, legislative requirements, coming up even after you have started building your vessel. The environmental footprint, the pandemic, all of that will add into the equation, which of course from our point of view gives us a comfortable position because we have a little bit of time before we need to go into the next decision wave. But on the other hand, there is many more questions than ever seen before that needs to be taken into consideration before we place the next new building order. And of course, the headline above all of this is collaboration. We don't think that we as a ship owner can go out and decide exactly what to do without a strong collaboration in the industry. We have seen that already now with partnerships when it comes to placing orders. We see that in developing new technologies where we use our vessels as platforms, for testing technologies, but for new buildings, it's a completely different ballgame. So I guess that was my 3 to 4 minute short introduction. Short one, we are in an okay position. Long one requires collaboration and new solutions that we have ever seen before.
Thank you, Kasper. I think it will be really interesting after we've been through the other participants to maybe draw out a little bit on the collaboration, particularly with the regulators, because I think that could be quite a telling place to go. Robbie, can I ask you to introduce yourself from CalMac, please?
Yeah, thanks, Fran, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Robbie Drummond. I'm the Managing Director of CalMac Ferries. And for those of you who don't know CalMac, we run 33 vessels. We've got an average life of 23 years. Indeed, 8 of our vessels are over 30 years. So clearly, technology and renewal of fleet is very close to us. In the summer, we are running over 540 sailings a day, carrying nearly 6 million passengers. And the next 10 years is absolutely critical because increasingly those 6 million customers will no longer accept a carbon inefficient mode of transport. It is critical that customer expectations are really changing. UK's got a net zero target of 2050, and Scotland's been ambitious and taken that forward by 5 years. So we've got a net zero target of 2045. And if you look at the position we're in, we've got all the advantages of zero carbon technologies. You know, I'm not the right person to talk about the pros and cons of each one. But when you see in Scotland, we've got infinite wind power to produce hydrogen or ammonia. And CalMac's got pretty short routes, which are really applicable to the right types of battery technology. But one of the biggest challenges we face is shoreside, very remote locations. And technology sitting at the shoreside is a significant barrier to moving forwards. So the ingredients are in place, but what's missing for me, or where some of that pressure needs to come, is government intervention. And yes, we all need to work together, and we need to be collaborative, and we need to incentivize the early adoptions, but government intervention is going to be really important to drive the right interventions. And to take a slightly different perspective, you know, one of the things that's really important to us is safety. And we are really looking to push the safety of how we operate. We're engaged in an EU project called Safe Mode, where we're looking at incorporating human factors into safety critical designs. And that should benefit the future designs of vessels, for example, bridge equipment. So it's not just about fuel efficiency and zero carbon. I think safety is a key message that needs to be in there about how we design our future vessels. We're also teaming up with airline consultants to look at just culture principles, because we're trying to introduce a real learning culture. We run something like 150,000 sailings a year, and we look at where we get the things wrong. And actually what we should be looking at is where we get it right time and time again, and try and learn from that and create repeatable learning exercises. And that requires trust. And what a just culture does is build a framework around which we can improve trust right through our organization. I think I wanted to also touch on resilience, and if COVID has taught us anything, we are only as good as our people. We're only as resilient as our staff. We owe them a real duty of care. And mental health has always been a challenge in marine industry, and that's only increased over the last year, as it has with many other industries. So, you know, it's important for this group to really focus on the mental health of our staffs and colleagues, and what we can do to the rest of the industry. So thanks very much. Look forward to any questions at a later spot. Thanks.
Thanks, Robbie. I think there's some really interesting, particularly the engineering out of the safety issues. I think certainly in my career at sea, we've been very guilty in the past of expecting our seafarers to work around things, rather than necessarily taking things out at a design stage. And I'd like to come back to that too. Niclas, can I ask you please to give us your perspective?
Well, sure. Do you hear me? Start with that one.
Yeah.
Perfect. Got some technical problems here in the beginning. Well, so for Stena Line, we are just in the middle of deliveries of a new series, the E-Flexors, and I think we are building around 9 of those, where Stena Line will take 5. And I think the signal for those vessels are right now both flexibility that those 9 vessels are in, I think it's in 7 or 6 different versions. So it's like working with a platform, as we can potentially see in the car industry, for example. So that is one part of the vessels coming out. The second one is, of course, efficiency. Efficiency from a fuel perspective, where we can see so far when we measure that they are roughly 30% more efficient than a equal ferry that is potentially 10 years old. So flexibility and efficiency is really the signum for those e-flexors. And I will actually echo Kasper there, because that is what we have today. Then the question is, what kind of demands will we see tomorrow? Demands from our customers and demands from the legislators as well, and the market as such. And I think here we have a huge responsibility as an industry to not trying to copy the best from the past, but actually exploring what will be the best for the future. And therefore, when we are now looking into the next generation of vessels at Stena, it's actually, we do not allow anyone on the drawing table to have any funnel on the ships anymore, because they need, and it's I would say a requirement for the entire industry, to be fossil free for the next generations coming out. I mean, otherwise we will not as an industry have a future. We have a huge responsibility to continue carrying 90% of the world's cargo. And if we don't go fossil free, we will not carry 90% of the cargo in the future. So for us at Stena Line for the moment, it's the fossil free, it's spelled electricity and battery. And I'm sure that there will be some kind of hybrid, but that hybrid must be still fossil free. So you need to have 2 fossil free solutions for the future vessels to come up here. And also, as Robbie said here, it's not only about the vessels, it's also about the ashore infrastructure, where we need to put a lot of interest, but also pressure on those owning the grids to and from the ports as well. So I think we will see, and I understand that we will talk about partnership longer in here in the session, but I think that's crucial. So flexibility and fossil free, I think that is what's spelled for the future when it's coming to ships. The biggest challenge here is, of course, as we heard, safety. How do we deal with those kind of new engines or batteries in this case? But also the biggest challenge is the part that's spelled ashore for the future. And talking about fossil-free vessels, then of course there is a must that those needs to be run on green or blue electricity. Brown electricity will not be an option from the society to deliver to our ships in the future. So I think that is very much where we are at Stena Line, except for actually also then we're talking sometimes about in the society about recycling. Recycling is a totally different way of talking about scrapping in the shipping industry. Recycling, when it's coming to the rest of the society, is to reuse things. And I think that part is also one of our DNAs in Stena Line, where we're now also lengthening the first 2 Vincentinis in the world and try, instead of just building a building, we can also lengthening ships. And we've done this before with 4 or 5 different ships historically. And as long as we can see that they are sustainable, then of course we should use them as long as possible. And that's why we have 2 ships down in Turkey now being split in 2 parts and lengthening with 30% as well. So that's also a way to talking about not the shipping recycling, but the recycling we see in the rest of the world by reusing things. So there are different combinations for the years to come, but the future is absolutely spelled fossil free. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Niclas. I think there's one of the things that you've mentioned there that's really interesting is around the safety side of things. Particularly for me, it's around the training of and having the time to train our colleagues and our employees on the new technology as it comes in. So to making sure that the regulation and the training keeps up with the development as we want to put it in. It'd be interesting to know, certainly with some of the technology you've got, if you've had any issues with that.
Well, we're not really there yet. We have some of the ships where we have tests, like on Stena Atlantica, where we actually do run her on batteries in the maneuvering in the port of Gothenburg and Frederikshavn, and of course there are new ways to put safety on the top here. And what I think is the challenge is not really training our staff on board. The challenge is actually to get legislators to keep up the same tempo as the market is developing, and I think that will be a challenge as well.
That's interesting, thank you. John from Brittany, if I can ask you to give us an overview, please.
Yeah, thanks, Fran. Firstly, apologies, I was slightly late, so if I repeat anything that any of our colleagues on the line have already said, then yeah, sorry for that. But for those that don't know Brittany, we operate RoPax models on some of the longer connectivity routes between the UK, France, UK, Spain, and also Spain and France to Ireland. Niclas went just before me. We're actually taking a few of his E-flexes off him, and we see that as definitely the way forward, both in the size of the vessels. But interestingly, our next delivery will be the first LNG one that we have, and I think that LNG is definitely a staging fuel, and I think that Niclas is correct. We have to look at the long-term viability, but I think that very much means looking at the shoreside connectivity, the supply of fuel, of whatever it might be. And I think that the current COVID situation, I'm sure somebody's already mentioned it and we're not going to go into depth, but I think it's put pressure on what is the traditional RoPax model for the first time. It's been tripping along for a long time as it was. I think that it's given us some very big sort of thought processes about what the RoPax model may look like proportionally between passenger and freight in the next 10, 15 years. So I think that the commercial demands on shipping, both freight and passenger, will go through a little bit of a rebirth and a rethink over the next sort of 18 months or so, which will provide lots of the challenges which should inform our futures.
Thank you, John. And Paul, if you could give us an overview from Condor's perspective.
Yes, hi Fran and all the panelists and everybody on the seminar today. My apologies, technical problems. I'm pleased we weren't on the technical and innovation panel. So a warm welcome from the Chile Channel Islands from Condor. Paul Luxon, CEO, 2016. Channel Islands with passenger and freight services, lifeline essential services. So slightly different approach because I was conscious with 6 of us all ferry operators I didn't want to duplicate. So just some sort of more contextual overview before we get into the panel piece. So clearly the world relied on shipping forever in terms of connectivity for the global supply chain, and always will do. There's no question that it's the optimal mode of transport for the global supply chain that we all rely on. I think we've always faced in our industry significant challenges, and no doubt further challenges ahead as we saw last year to navigate, forgive the pun. But looking forward to 2030 over this next decade, what other problems are going to confront us, both our industry, our key economic enabling industry, in terms of those new challenges? Some that we absolutely know about, but of course other challenges that we've yet to materialize. So I think we'll have many, but I think our innovation and adaptability, as always, will that we're still able to take the shipping, ferry, and maritime sector into a stronger place in 10 years' time. So as I said, just as an overview, my 5 sort of contexts, aspect areas or focus areas, in I think descending order, is the COVID-19 impact, the pandemic, the implications, and indeed the scenario, the speed of and the trajectory, the financial balance sheet and liquidity implications, the impact and the repair, which is relevant to our ability, of course, to invest in new fleets and new builds. The Brexit implications, both immediate, short-term and mid-term. I don't think we've even remotely got to terms with exactly what that's going to mean for how we operate and indeed how we go about dealing with the new processes. key to us all on this panel, of course, is sustainability and digitalization. That these technology innovations and fuel options are key parts of what I'm sure we'll talk about very shortly. And then finally, I think the horizon planning. We've got a very different world right now, and 12 months ago, we wouldn't be looking at the world and our industry sector and our businesses with the same glasses, if you like, as a very different world. And we have to adapt and work out what that means for all of our long business plans. So those are the 5 strategic outlooks that I just thought I'd raise. Forward now to hearing and learning lots, and hopefully we'll end up more informed than when we started. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. I think exactly that whole recovery piece is really critical to us all from the COVID-19, and I dare say we're all knee deep in looking at what that's going to look like, given the progress of the vaccinations and the like. I think one of the things that's come out from everybody so far is this piece of the infrastructure and the requirements. And I see we've got a question from Keir regarding the issue of the shoreside. So I think the question says, is there a silver bullet that can deal with providing ships with reliable zero-emission shore power? I think it's, from my side, certainly being based in Southampton, one of the biggest issues we've got is that shoreside infrastructure. And bluntly, the cables aren't big enough to be able to provide the electricity at the port. I wonder, Robbie, you must have similar challenges with your small ports up in Scotland.
Oh yeah, we operate in some very remote locations, and that's a real challenge. And we do operate 3 diesel electric hybrids, but the question is that power being produced from a sustainable level? And that's where the government intervention needs to come in. That investment needs to be to connect whatever that green power is, if that's coming through electricity, to connect that to shoreside and have the investments that are going to come in there. And that's the challenge for us is, we might be using some green vessels, but are they actually using green power if that's being produced from unsustainable sources? So, I'm not an expert on potential options, but it certainly needs a significant amount of investment. And if someone like us who operates something like 30 different ports, that's going to be a major challenge to have that level of investment into each of those different sites.
And I suppose that draws again into the shoreside infrastructure for LNG. John, with your LNG side of things, is that something that you've worked in collaboration with, or are you doing that from an individual perspective?
Well, we started off as individual perspective. I think as it builds a bit of momentum, we're looking at sort of partners and what the future might look like. I think Robbie's made a good point on the infrastructure side. I think a little bit of collaboration, not just with commercial shipping, but maybe with we operate out of 2 naval ports as well, and there just seems to be opportunities that are not being pursued fully enough for the shipping world as a whole. For these new fuel types, because it's the shoreside infrastructure is definitely the limiting factor rather than the shipping in moving this forward.
Thank you, John. Niclas, do you find similar, or have you found that's slightly easier with perhaps the better infrastructure that you've got?
Well, it's very national driven. I can see from a Scandinavian perspective in the ports we have up here in Scandinavia, especially in Sweden. It's a quite easy part because we have a lot of the blue energy, the water and the wind up here. More or less everything is green, and I think in Sweden is the cheapest energy costs in the entire Europe for the moment to be. Then if we see, for example, down in Germany, we're really struggling with taxations of the electricity there. Coming over to UK, I think we're struggling with the how should I put it properly here? The quality of the energy. It's so much brown energy that we find in UK, and of course, then there is no interest for us to use that kind of electricity. But I must say, the last couple of 1.5 to 2 years, we see a change in the trend that there are becoming more interest of getting the electricity to the ports. We see quite big involvements from politicians who see the upside of having a shore electricity for the ports as well. However, to make this discussion a little bit wider as well, in the future it's not only about the ships. Of course, there is a huge demand from our side to precisely see so we can, I mean, overload a ship with electricity for 30 minutes that should be possible to use for 3 or 4 hours sailing with that electricity. But don't forget the customers' vehicles as well, where we will in the future see more or less all trucks coming to our ports driven by electricity, and they also need to charge at the same time as we charge the ships. And then of course the tug masters in our ports and everything else that is actually more or less rolling in to and from the port. So the demand of electricity must be put in a wider perspective than only the ships to be successful here. So I think we're talking about electrified ecosystem that needs to be put in place when we're talking about the big picture.
And presumably that electrified ecosystem then is something that needs to be done by government collaboration, but at a multinational level. I think it goes back to Kasper's early point around collaboration with regulators and more widely. Kasper, do you think that takes us out into something that as we're designing and building and choosing ships that we actually need to be collaborating at almost not quite a global level, but something that says that we've got parties at every aspect rather than collaborating as shipbuilders or as yards or in smaller scale?
There's no doubt that the point about collaboration, many different shapes. I'm not sure that the end solution is having a hardwire you plug in and everything goes into a battery. I do hope that eventually we will go into a direction of hydrogen or other energy sources that will be able to be more flexible, because the solution with electricity, and if you need to plug in the grid worldwide, then we will be limited and will not be successful worldwide if that is the solution. So I do believe that needs to be even more innovation put into the development of the future propulsion power, and that could be hydrogen, could be other energy sources on top of the electricity. Coming back to the collaboration, I think we have seen that the collaboration between ship owners, shipyards, and engine producers, etc. We have had that for many years, where it has been quite easy to be the ship owner because we could just demand, this is the product, this is what we would like you to build for us. But now we need to have a collaboration between different ship owners as well, and also much wider in the industry. So yes, we can with it. It requires collaboration on many different levels, not only the simple, let's go out and build 5 vessels together. There is much more into it.
Thank you, Kasper. Paul, certainly from your side running the Lifeline service to the Channel Islands, presumably some of the challenges you're facing around the route to emissions, especially with the high-speed craft. Have you got any thoughts on that?
Sorry, Fran, I think Paul's got some connectivity issues.
Okay, thank you, John. I think certainly from my perspective, operating small high-speed craft, that is definitely one of the challenges. Obviously, with the size of the vessels that Red Funnel operates across the Solent, it's much easier for us to adopt battery power and to consider things like that. But I think from Paul's side with the large high-speed craft and yourself, John, at Brittany, that is definitely going to be a challenge for the future. And I think having looked at some of the proposals regarding reducing speed to reduce emissions, from my perspective, I think customers generally want to get where they're going on a timetable. John, I'd be interested if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing. I think, there is an argument that high speed traveling slower is more energy efficient, but obviously is conceptually somewhat against the entire idea. And I think the fast cats are of whatever size, a passenger orientated, and they should be compared to the aviation more than shipping, because it is about speed and sort of time of arrival. But I do think that they probably create the biggest challenge for us, because the more traditional vessels of whatever size, I think that whether it's battery, hydrogen, LNG going forward, that there's some very simple options, but the fast cats, to provide the commercial service that's being demanded that you intimated there, I think is very, very difficult to do with the fuels that we are talking about at the moment.
Thank you, John. I think just looking at the interest of time there, we've probably quite like to move on to the safety culture piece. And I see we've had a question from Scott asking about the safety culture on board facing strain due to COVID, and whether we're seeing different challenges in our shorter sea sectors compared to the deep sea side. And I would say certainly from a red funnel point of view, I'm very aware that my team is tired, whether it's ashore or afloat, and it's not the sort of fatigue that any of us can do anything about. This is not a compliance with the hours of rest regulations. This is, I think, probably across globally, we're seeing that deep mental fatigue where every aspect of everybody's life is affected. And certainly, you know, from my history in shipping to where we are now, we are night and day in terms of support from where we were when I first went to sea in 1993. And I think that's probably an upside, but how we continue to support our staff as we move through this is probably a question we're all facing. And certainly in terms of safety, that's one of our key things. COVID cannot be allowed to take away any of the attention from the things that are most important to us, and that safe operation is obviously one of them. Kasper, is that something that you've seen from your side?
Of course, it is always extremely high on the agenda. And of course, we are pleased that successful in the industry with the discussions with governmental bodies to actually secure that we can have our staff traveling home after being on board for a short or long period of time. So we have actually succeeded to create those travel corridors. At the same time, of course, in the early days of the crisis, we paid full attention to implement all the safety measures and safe distance, etc. But at the same time, we need to accept that it is their home. So being on board a ferry as a crew member, it is actually interfering with the daily life. So to adhere to a number of measures to reduce the risk of COVID-19, at the same time, you also need to socialize and spend time together. So it's an extremely delicate balance to actually go on board and tell people what to do in their spare time when they're on board 24/7. So it is an extremely difficult one. Of course, we see the light at the end of the tunnel, and we do hope that we are moving closer and closer to a more normal operation, but there will be another months ahead of us before we are there.
Thank you, Kasper. Robbie, did you find that the focus on the day-to-day safety and the normal safe operation was compromised at all by the COVID precautions or by people's general mindset? Or
yeah, and I think, Fran, you made a good point there that people are mentally tired now. You know, that their teams are tired, the staff on board are tired. I think, we work in very careful bubbles, but the difference with ferries is we've got staff who are operating on 1 week on or 2 week on, and then they're returning back to the family. So they are naturally concerned about their own safety, they're concerned about their family safety, and they're also concerned about passengers. And we've got, carrying what are fairly concerned passengers, and we run lifeline sailing. So we're still carrying, at the moment, 40-50% of our normal traffic is still going backwards and forwards. So you're carrying people who are very concerned with their own safety, and then you're concerned about yourself and your family, and that is mentally very tiring. And at the same time, we're chopping and changing timetables to react to government interactions or to react to community pressure who wants less sailings, or they want more sailings to do a Brexit, or the community want actually less because they want to be protected. So there's that stakeholder pressure, passenger pressure, and then their own, working in their own bubbles and what they're hearing. So, it is a hugely challenging time to keep people safe. At the same time, all the normal things you do around safety have to be maintained. So all the normal processes have to be there, and we have to keep that real focus. So trying to keep that going in the face of this is pretty tough. And, we can only look forward to coming out of it and getting people kind of re-energized back into their normal jobs.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that surprised me slightly was the actual, there's something that's really hard to risk assess against. So the loss of spatial awareness when you're wearing a face mask or a face covering is really interesting. Having put one on and walked around, you realise how much you don't see at the sides. And for us, with the RoPax vessels operating where we have vehicles moving around in the proximity of our own staff and pedestrians, is a really interesting point. And I don't think any of us would have necessarily foreseen that at a risk assessment stage.
Yeah. I think that the challenge there that crews are having to, do these cleaning regimes. Our ferries are operating about 25% of the normal capacity due to physical distancing. There's measures in place about the signs and distancing, all those things that the crews have to manage on top of the normal day-to-day activities. And we have to recognise as the leaders of our business how tiring and mentally draining that is for people. make sure we're trying to give them every support.
Absolutely agree on that. And I think that's another point to consider for us, is whether or not we think that, as you said before, Robbie, you mentioned about designing out the root cause of issues and improving safety that way without putting the onus necessarily on our seafarers and operators. Do you think that we're going to be designing vessels with a COVID focus or a biological protection focus as we move forward now?
I would like to think that's got to be a consideration. I think for me, I would try to draw it out a bit wider, that we should be designing vessels that take all human factors into account. And it's a danger we talk about technology and about fuel efficiency, and absolutely that's an important subject, but so is human factors. And the better we can make these human factors, then we can design out some of those risks, and we can make our vessel safer and make it a better onboard experience for our staff, and make those roles easier and more attractive for future generations, because we need to bring more people onto the industry in the future.
I think that's a really good point, and certainly one of the the challenges that I get involved in some of the women in maritime things, but actually it's not about women in maritime, it's about everyone in maritime, because the problem we have is attracting people to our organisation and our industry now. It's a much wider issue than diversity, as important as that is. It's actually just getting people through the door. John, do you find that from your side of things, or do you find that the French way of doing things is easier?
There's a statement. No, I think, to be honest, maritime and recruitment are difficult everywhere. I think maybe one of the positives to come out of COVID, because we all have to look for somewhere, is I think at least it's given the focus, particularly for UK PLC, on the importance of maritime to us as an island economy. And also, I mean, for yourself and the Isle of Wight and the Channel Islands, Paul's dropped off, but the Lifeline services and Robbie up in Scotland, people take maritime for granted so much of the time, and maybe through this, the sort of the focus on maritime and deliveries of freight and Lifeline support, etc., may help that recruitment. But I think that we've seen as an industry, we've very much gone away from European crews as the stock, because it's become very, very difficult to recruit through Europe. Hopefully we can turn that trend around and make it attractive. But I think this focal point is a good launch pad for that. But whether we are successful in sort of changing back many years of downward trend will be a challenge over the next sort of 12, 18 months.
And I suppose that comes back again to the 2 points, doesn't it? It's the collaboration is important, but also it's making sure that we design vessels that are attractive for young people to join. And one of the things I've said all along is, when I went to sea initially, we didn't have the technology, there was no internet. So you went away to sea and you were lucky if you got a letter every time you got into port. Now, for people who are going away to sea with Facebook, Snapchat, the technology, they know what they're missing. And I think that makes it much more obvious what you're missing, and therefore the homesickness is a much higher issue. And I think that's something we need to consider with expectations as well for people coming in. Niclas, from your side, how do you find the recruitment and the retention for seafarers?
Well, of course, a challenge, and it's of course also, how should I put it, the quality of the recruitment as well. And I think there is a huge demand for the future for us as an employer to actually start talking about not only, and sorry for me repeating myself here, but diesel engines and the steel itself. I think it's a lot of what kind of company we are, what kind of values we are driving, equality. I think it's very important also that we actually are doing what we're saying, and those parameters will be extremely important for us as an industry in the future to be attractive. However, I think we have a perfect position to actually be more attractive once just sitting here in this panel and we have this kind of discussions is of course empowering people to start working for an industry like the shipping industry. And I think really we have put ourselves on the spot during the COVID. It has been, and it still is, super tough times for all of us, I'm sure. But when I see that we actually do, as an industry, supporting the entire Europe with vaccine or oxygen to the hospitals, it's coming via all of our ships around this panel here. So we do really play a very important role for the society, and that is also important for the future generations to work for companies and industry where it makes sense. And I also think that when we see the way of travel with ships and working on ships versus travel and working on trains or buses or aircrafts, I really think we have a golden opportunity to show that we are more or less already COVID-19 secured in that way. So it's more like a question of behaviors for ourselves and our passengers on board. But I don't think we should overkill things here in redesigning ships, etc., because I think we have a golden opportunity with actually you isolated driving on board with your car, isolated walking into your cabin, or you can go out and have some fresh air. I think that's the only mode of travel you can do that. And we should be super proud as an industry and not as individual companies to actually promote this for customers, but also for future employees.
I think that's a brilliant point. It's something that we probably have an advantage on in attracting people into the industry with the shorter nature of the contracts as well. We've had an interesting question that's come up, or a point raised by John, regarding newly qualified officers who are completing their cadetships, where the barrier being that every job wants at least 1 year's experience in the role. So I guess there's a question that we can ask here, which is what can we put in place as operators to help new officers, or any advice to officers to get people to stand out from the crowd while applying. So I think that's a really valid point, because certainly in ferries generally we do ask for experience, because I think historically have limited berths on board, and the routes we're operating are generally high frequency and can be high traffic density. So how do we as an industry support young officers coming through with a newly qualified ticket but not able to get berths or roles on board? I guess, Kasper, have you got any thoughts on that?
I saw the immediately start reflecting. I don't have the specific data here in front of me. I think we in DFDS, we do educate quite a lot of officers all the way through the system, and we're extremely proud of being able to have I can't use the word in English, but feed chain, where you can be promoted and you can have a career all the way from starting as a cadet until you eventually end up as a chief engineer or master. So there is a way all the way through in our system, and we are extremely proud of that. Of course, I don't know top of my mind the intake, and if we have if we also live up to the obligation to take newly educated officers in. So I must leave that one for another time.
Thank you, Kasper. Robbie, presumably you have similar issues to that we do at Red Funnel with the short nature of the voyages.
Yeah, we train or sponsor, I think, at least 10 cadets a year, or 10 to 15. So at any one point in time, we've got 30 to 35 cadets. But you're right, they go off and do their experience elsewhere. So it's a very interesting question, that because not all of them get roles with CalMac, because we don't have that numbers of roles. But at the same time, we've got a very aging workforce, and we need to bring that kind of new generation through. So it's an interesting challenge that you raise there.
I think it's something, as you say, right, the workforce is aging with shipping, and it's interesting to hear that we've got, and there's certainly 2 people have already commented on that basis. It's something that I'll raise with the MNTB, because I think they're already aware of it, but I wonder if there's something that we can do in terms of the structure, or something in the collaboration to try and find berths for newly qualified officers. Certainly back when I did my tickets, I think the majority of newly qualified officers went deep sea, but if those deep sea berths aren't available at the moment, then that proves more of a challenge. John, what about you? You take cadets and apprentices, I think.
We do, predominantly through the French system. We're the largest employer of French seamen, apart from the French Navy, and so therefore we do have a very good internal growth selection process, and a lot of the officers come in from day one and spend their entire careers with us. So we do have that, but it's a fairly narrow entry point, unfortunately.
And Niclas, from you at Stena, presumably similar. It's homegrown.
Yeah, yeah, it is absolutely, and of course it's in everybody's interest to promote those people who took this step in their career, and I think it's important that we do it. But then, of course, as in all other places, there are limitations, and we have to respect that one as well. But we do as much as we possible can, and I mean, on some ships is ending up that we have more. Well, we have to say no to passengers because we have cadets on board sometimes. So of course there are a couple of bottlenecks for all of us, but we have a responsibility there, absolutely. But I think is in all other issues in the world, we can't satisfy 100%.
Thank you. I think the other thing that probably at the moment is whether or not I think there has been definitely a shortage in our industry in qualified seafarers, but at the moment with the issues that cruise is facing, we've definitely seen an increase in availability of qualified officers. Do you think that is something that's going to be beneficial for us on a ferry's perspective, or as cruise resumes, which I think we all hope it does very shortly? Do you think that's going to reverse the trend, or will people find ferries more attractive? Kasper, do you have any thoughts?
Question. No, on this specific one, no. I will actually pass it if I may.
Yeah, I'll take it if you want, Kasper. I think, Fran, you're right. I think cruise will start again. I hope for everyone's sake it does. Therefore, I think it's a very short-term impact. I think that we've seen generally cruise officers, particularly coming towards the end of their careers, then come on to the short hop stuff that they refer to as ferry business. So I don't think it's going to permanently change. I think it's just a kink in the current demand pool.
Yeah, I think certainly from my experience in ferries, that we generally have quite a slow turnover of staff because people come to ferries for lifestyle side of things. It'll be interesting to see on the outcomes of that. I mean, Robbie, with your staffing up at CalMac, you've clearly got quite a few staff on the books. Do you find that your location is a barrier, or people are happy to travel?
I think actually location is attractive for us. Folk love to travel up where we are. It's a beautiful part of the world. I think the challenge for us is not so much recruitment today. The challenge for us, and maybe same for you, Fran, that many of our crews are older. On the older of the spectrums, we have many people in their kind of 55s and 60s who are maybe 5 to 10 years from retiring, and then there's a big gap. There's a big gap there of people that are going to need to fill up and move into those roles, and we're not sure how that's going to work because there is a gap in experience that as those people retire, people are going to need to be trained and moved up. So that's something that we're kind of thinking about, is to, in the next 5 to 10 years, there's going to be a significant kind of recruitment promotional challenge that we are going to have to address. I'm not sure how that sits with other people.
And that's engineering. I think we know that we've got across all areas of the industry issues with recruiting engineers, and I think certainly from what I see with ferries, it's a particular challenge. Niclas, do you find that from your perspective, or is it easier to recruit engineers with you?
I don't think any recruitment is easy, honestly, well, I can only echo the other ones as well. But when you mention the whole cruise industry, I think we should also say that we can increase services on board when we see all the cruise, the service people coming back to Europe as well from the Caribbean and still want to work on board ships as well. So I think we can increase the knowledge and the level of our service being in the service industry as well. So hopefully there are some upsides of this one as well. But yes, of course, still huge challenges in the recruitment phase. And as you said yourself before, Fran, it's about recruiting everybody. But I still see it as a challenge and a obligation to find more female seafarers in the future as well.
If I may jump in here, Fran, the reason for pausing is, of course, now we have just been through the crisis, and all of us, we have been forced to adjust our workforce, and especially when it comes to the catering department, reducing schedule, etc. So we have been through a process where, unfortunately, we have been forced to say goodbye to numbers of extremely skilled employees. So of course it's difficult to stand now still in the crisis and to figure out what is the next when we're going to hire. And we need to do all the adjustments, all of us. And at the same time, we need to now invest in resources and our staff going forward. So we are still in crisis mode, so to speak, when it comes to staffing.
And I think that's exactly the point I made at the beginning, isn't it? Where we're trying to have a strategic view and a long-term view, but the crisis and Brexit as well has forced us to take a really here and now view because of our financial sustainability and our obligations. So I think that's definitely one of the biggest challenges we're probably facing as an industry at the moment. I'd just like to note that Matthew has put a poll up, if anyone's seen it. It's around the collaboration point, and I think this is the collaboration regarding how widely can we collaborate, and should we be collaborating even potentially with other industries. So to anyone watching, if you haven't voted on the poll, it would be really interesting to do so. I noticed that 3 people have put that they think the structures are in existence to promote collaboration. And I'd be interested if anyone who had done that could put a few comments up or comment on that, because from my side, I don't see the structures are there for the collaboration, and it's something that everybody has signed up to, but it's very hard to actually bring the parties together into, particularly from a government perspective. Kasper, you're nodding. Have you find that particularly from a government side?
I think this is an extremely interesting one, because we are extremely good when it comes to competing against each other, and when it comes to collaboration throughout the as an example, the UK Chamber of Shipping. So there is different forms where we can do collaboration across different ship owners and also with the industry. The task we have ahead of us requires much more than just 2 individuals seeing now we can collaborate for a joint goal. So it requires that there's some investments. And as a ship owner, we don't have a huge R&D budget allowing us to invest in a number of different technologies. We all know if you do that, there will be 1 out of 10 or 1 out of 100 that will be successful. As an individual shipping company, we simply cannot invest in such an R&D world. So there is a big need for money that can be used for development and collaboration. So we can use skilled employees across the industry to develop solutions together, so we can benefit and harvest together. But for now, there is definitely not the structure that comes with money, because that will bring us to the next level.
Yeah, I think I would absolutely support that point. John, do you find that from your side, obviously working quite closely with the French government on several projects?
Yeah, no, I tend to echo everything Kasper's just said. I think that as an industry, we've been forced to be very reactive to everything, as opposed to really having that long-term strategic view through collaboration, through investment. I think that it's very it's simple to say you need to throw money at it, but it's also about having a joined up vision, which isn't anti-competitive. It's got to be, we've got to split the commercials away and look at shipping, fueling, etc. as an industry, because particularly when you get to landside infrastructure, you want to be investing in one together that you can all utilize for the best for the entire industry, and that level of collaboration isn't there. And you mentioned the political lobbying, etc. I think that the chamber do a great job for the industry, and we work together well as an industry. We all know each other, but I think when we start trying to network with other industries, it becomes more and more difficult, and none of us seem to have enough time to promote that part of our business, unlike, say, aviation, that are very, very good at lobbying and throw a lot of money at it to move things forward.
Do you think that's something that will be better led by government or a government department such as the DFT?
They certainly have to be involved. Whether they need to take the absolute lead on it, they certainly need to be number 1 or number 2 in the sort of the front line. But I think the vision needs to probably come from the industry, and then we need to find the right mechanics to move it forward.
Thank you, John. And Robbie, again, you're close to government from what you do. Do you find that more or less, or do you find that more of a hindrance, perhaps?
I think we operate Lifeline services, but when you think about creation, you're trying to, we've all running our own businesses. We're trying to run them safely, efficiently, generate some money. We can't manage that whole structure. And you think about the end-to-end supply chain from how is power generated, how is that green power generated, how is it transported, how does it get to ports, what is the right mechanisms, what's the technologies. Trying to bring all that together is challenging, and none of us can do that on our own, and it needs that collaboration, and it needs government to set out that vision and to bring the parties together. And I think we should also be collaborating with different industries, because in some locations, the ferry may not be enough, but actually when you bring that together, perhaps with other industries, whether that's commercial or NHS or councils requiring those sorts of power, then you can create something that's much more interesting and much more deliverable. But it needs structures to kind of bring all that together, whether that's a local country level or indeed at kind of European level.
Thank you. And I think that's something that we probably need to communicate outwards. Niclas, do you have any thoughts on how we might communicate that as an industry? And I guess potentially the Chamber of Shipping is the forum that we could use to do so.
I think so, and I mean, of course, it can be sensitive to start cooperate with as we say, competitors here, but I think we should never, and this is not from a UK and DFT perspective. It's very every country in the whole wide world where we should not let the government run those kind of projects, because then I don't think it will happen, honestly. I think we need to take the lead as industry, and we can do that via like the Chamber of Shipping here. The governments must be involved. They can be some kind of mitigators or facilitators, but it's important that we as running the business also take the lead in the discussions here, and also showing what's possible and what's not possible in from a legislative perspective or a safety perspective. But I think, as you say, Robbie, you're running lifeline routes. I think honestly we all do, otherwise they wouldn't exist anymore. But I think there we can also put some kind of pressure on the society itself that it is important with shipping. It's been for the last 2,000 years and will be the next 2,000 years as well. So therefore cooperation, I think it's necessary, but we need to take the lead, and UK shipping chamber will be the facilitators there. I think that is a position where we can see a much bigger expectation and demands from us as members as well to run those kind of questions more efficient as well.
Thank you, Niclas. I think that probably wraps us up quite neatly, really. And I noticed that we're coming towards the end of time. So I think really we've covered quite a lot of ground there, and I'd like to thank you all for your active participation, and also to the people, our attendees, who've been really good in putting up questions and answers in a lot of cases. I think it's a bit of a shame we didn't have much more time, because it feels like we could all carry this one on, and maybe we should take it for next year's Chamber of Shipping annual dinner. And I hope to see you all there. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thanks, Fran. Thanks all. Bye.